Hey everyone, it's patch 3.23 Affliction, and today I want to talk about the 3 new Wildwood Ascendancies that are coming with the new league. Now, these are going to be very, very cool. These are going to be Ascendancies that you're going to be able to add onto your current build at no downside. This effectively means that with the upcoming league, you're going to be able to ascend twice. First, as your Ascendancy of your choice for your class, and then second, as a new Wildwood Ascendancy of either the Warden, the Warlock, or the Primalist. Now, all of these are very distinct, and all of these are going to be very fun, and I wanted to do a breakdown of each of them and give you my opinion on how I feel about all the notes. So the first one I want to start with today is going to be the Warden. Now, this is going to be a melee and bow centric ascendancy. The main thing here that is going to interest you in picking this is going to be Coated Blade. You can apply tinctures to your equipped weapons. Now, what tinctures are going to be new flasks that you can equip instead of your current flask, and these are going to give you permanent buffs, assuming that you are actually attacking with your weapon. That means if you are spellcasting, these aren't going to actually do anything. These are specifically applied to your weapon, and you must attack with a weapon to gain these buffs. So for example, here we have the Oak Branch Tincture. All of these are going to have bases. So for example, this one gives you Cooling Strike, while this one gives you damaging hits, always stuns enemies that are in full life, as well as having a prefix and a suffix that is going to roll on every single one of them. Now, these are going to be unmodifiable, but these are going to be obtainable from the new Wildwood vendors as you do the new league mechanic. This is also going to interact with your other flasks in very interesting ways. So for example, at the top, we have Nature's Concoction. This is going to make it so flasks adjacent to your tincture gain 3 charges when you hit an enemy with a weapon, no more than once every 3 seconds, while also making those flasks have 30% increased effect. This is going to be incredibly powerful. So one combo I can already think of here is using this with a Progenesis. Typically, keeping up a Progenesis is very difficult, and you need to invest quite a lot into flask charge recovery and flash charges used to be able to have 100% uptime on it. Well, this effectively is giving you 3 charges per second, which should scale with flash charge gain rates, which means that you can turn this into 4 or potentially even 5 charges per hit. On top of that, you're going to get 30% increased effect. So if we use the example of Progenesis again, which scales very well with increased flask effect, you can potentially get an incredibly powerful Progenesis, meaning you can have a potentially incredibly powerful defensive layer. There's nothing here that says that we cannot stack these as well, meaning if I have a Progenesis that's next to 2 different tinctures, I could potentially get 60% increased effect. This is going to be incredibly powerful, and you could do some very interesting things with this, making this a very, very desirable point to pick up. Just these 2 points of Nature's Concoction and Coated Blade alone make the Warden a must-have ascendancy for quite a lot of builds that want to heavily utilize their flasks, mostly Pathfinder. The other interesting branch here is going to be Enduring Suffocation. Tinctures applied to you have 75% increased effect per empty flask slot. So you could potentially have some sort of build where you just want to have a life flask, a quicksilver, and a tincture to gain an additional 150% increased effect on a really powerful tincture. We don't really know about any other ones except for the 2 that they've shown here. So we'll have to see just how strong this node is as we get to data mine the different bases and as we get to data mine the different possible rolls on them. The rest of the ascendancy, in my opinion, is a little bit lackluster. So first off, we have Detect Evil, which is kind of a nice ascendancy, and it's actually interesting that they're adding ascendancies on here that aren't necessarily either defensive gain or power gain. The Detect Evil is going to make it so your hits against mark enemies cannot be blocked or suppressed. Now, this is kind of useless, as the only places where this is really useful is going to be on invitations. So specifically for the Maven invitations, for Eater Worlds, and for Searing Exarch, as this will effectively make it so those rolls on your invitations are just not effects anymore. But in maps, this is going to be kind of useless as it's only against marked enemies. So 1, if you're not marking in the first place, is going to do nothing. And 2, it's only going to affect 1 mob on the screen at a time. The other interesting thing is that rare and unique enemies within 120 meters have minimap icons, which potentially might actually be nice to pick for some sort of headhunter strategy. And it might be nice to pick if you plan to do a lot of bossing and you have difficulty tracking the bosses. One good example here might be with Cyrus. The other side of the ascendancy is a defensive oriented portion. So first we have a new aura, level 20 Barkskin. What this does is it's going to apply a buff on you. And what this buff does is it's going to give you quite a lot of armor. Think of this like determination. As you get hit, the armor is going to decrease, but you're going to gain an increasing amount of evasion. This is basically determination and Grace put together into one aura that cycles between the two depending on how much you get hit. An interesting thing here is if we take Lesson the Seasons, we gain increased chance to avoid non-damaging ailments per bark below maximum. So every time we lose a bark and aren't at the full bark value, meaning we're gaining more and more evasion, we're also gaining avoid non-damaging ailments, and we're getting reduced effect. In my opinion, this node is complete garbage because you never want conditional avoidance on ailments. You always want to have 100% chance, and you always want it to be active. And the problem with this is if you haven't been hit recently to break off any of your barks, you will not be avoidance cap if you're using this as a way to get avoidance cap. Lastly, we have a pretty interesting choice, and this actually has shown up quite a bit this season in some other items and some other effects that they're adding. Oath of the Mage is going to reward you for not having any socketed gems in specific pieces of your gear. So for example, if you have nothing in your body armor, the defenses are doubled. So if you had a brass dome, for example, which gives you 5,000 armor, this is going to double it. And if you ran this along with a juggernaut, which doubles again, this means you could effectively quadruple the defenses of your body armor, which could lead to some very hilariously high armor values on a juggernaut, for example. If you have no gems in your helmet, you get 50% to all res, which might make this a really powerful choice if you're leveling, if these ascendancies are easy to obtain and available while you are going through the axe, as 50% all res in the axe is very much potentially worth giving up no sockets in your helmet at all, especially as you might not actually have enough gems while leveling to fill in all of your gem sockets. Next up, we have a really powerful effect, 25% increased maximum life if there are no gems in your gloves. This might make it so this is a worthy endgame pick, especially if you are playing a build that wants to stack a lot of health, or if you just have a build that doesn't necessarily need as many gems and you're okay with potentially even sacrificing a gem just to gain 25% increased life. And lastly, for boots, we get 30% increased movement speed if nothing is equipped in your boots. This is going to be a very fun one. I could very much see people use this. Overall, personally, I feel like Warden is going to be very strong, but I don't personally like any of the nodes outside the tinctures. I think the tinctures are going to be very strong, especially for any sort of hit-based Pathfinder. I think hit-based Pathfinder just goes along with this way too well, especially just how hilariously fast you can scale a Progenesis into becoming your whole defensive layer by itself, and you basically don't need anything else. Moving on, next, we have the Warlock. Now, the Warlock is going to be more of a niche ascendancy. It's not going to be something that you're going to be considering in every single build. It's going to mostly just have niche uses, but it's going to have some very powerful effects. So the most interesting portion of this is going to be the left branch of this whole ascendancy, starting with Thingumancy. So first, we're forced to take blood magic. This means our mana just isn't a thing anymore. Our skills now cost life. Our skills now reserve life, meaning that everything we do is now based on our life, while at the same time we gain increased reservation efficiency and removing all of our mana. This is a big price to pay, but the other two nodes behind it are incredibly powerful, so it makes sense to pay the price of not having mana anymore. At the bottom, we have Crimson Power. This makes it so we now also don't have energy shield. So if you take this, all you will have as a defensive layer is going to be ward and life. But in return, anything that scales maximum energy shield is instead going to scale maximum life. Meaning if you properly stack this, and if you make a build based around ES stacking, you could potentially be hitting hilariously high amounts of life. It is not going to be unreasonable to see builds with potentially 30, 40, 50,000 life popping up in this season. There are mechanics that will very much love to take all that life and turn it into damage. A good example here is Relic of the Past, which is a one-handed mace that reserves your life and does a big explosion that scales with how much life it reserves, meaning that hitting very large health pools means that you will just do substantially more damage. Another good option here is Ralapath Globe, which is another item that happily will scale off of eating away your life. The other interesting thing here, and the reason we want to have a really big life pool like this, is going to be the node at the top, Cannibalized Faith. This is Archmage for life, which is very interesting. Spells you cast yourself gain added physical damage equal to 20% of the life cost if the life cost is not higher than the maximum you would spend. This is actually wrong. It's not 20%. If we look here on the actual page itself, we can see that the Warlock node is actually 75% of life cost. This is just as good as the current Archmages, making this a one-to-one comparison to Archmage, but for life skills. Now, if you don't know how Archmage scales, basically all you want to do is to just have a absolutely massive mana pool. The bigger a mana pool, the more mana you can eat away, meaning your Archmage scales faster. And the same thing is going to go here. You're going to want to take Crimson Power to scale your life as much as you can, and then you're going to take Cannibalized Faith to be able to eat through that life pool as fast as possible to gain a massive amount of added physical damage to your skills. This is going to be opening a completely new can of worms on how to build your builds, and it's going to be very interesting to see what people come up with. Up next, at the top of the tree, we have Blood Hunt, which is going to give you level 20 Ravenous skill. In my opinion, this is pretty weak. What this does is it gives you the option to eat corpses, and based on the type of corpse you eat, you will gain a permanent damage increase and less damage taken from that type for the rest of the area that you're in. So as we can see here, an example, this at the top you can see is a corpse type humanoid. So if you were to eat this corpse in a map, you would permanently gain less damage taken from anything classified as a humanoid and do more damage to them. Now, there's going to be a vendor in the Wildwood that is going to sell you corpses. So these are going to be items that you can buy, and that means you can take them with you into a boss area, drop them in the boss area and consume them there to gain increased damage and less damage taken from bosses, because all bosses are going to be classified as Eldritch, and we're going to have Eldritch bodies. Now, one thing you might notice here, these bodies have abilities. These are all going to be spectrable corpses, and the one that they have shown off in the live stream was the Perfect Hydra, which is literally just Hydra. This allows you to make Hydra as a Spectre now, which is going to be very cool. And this could potentially completely unlock Spectres as a endgame and meta build again, assuming some of these Spectres are powerful enough for it. Up next, moving over to the node in the middle, this is going to give you level 20 summon Dark Effigy. Now, we don't actually know what Dark Effigy does, but I'm going to go on a limb here and say that this is going to be the same thing as the Effigy Arch Nemesis mod that some rare monsters have. This is that thing that summons a totem with your corpse on it, and it's linked to you. And anytime the enemies hit the totem, you also take damage. I'm going to assume this is most likely going to be the same thing, to where you can cast this while targeting an enemy to make an effigy with that enemy on it, meaning you can either hit the enemy itself or hit the effigy to do damage to it. One potential interesting thing here might be that if you can use this on a boss, such as Maven, and you put it right on top of the Maven and you AoE it down, you effectively could potentially be doing double damage as you're hitting the boss and you're hitting the effigy, which then does damage to the boss itself, assuming this is a 1-to-1 health transfer. We'll see what this does. That's just my speculation on what this most likely will be, and we'll have to see what this actually ends up being if they do show us what it is before the season actually comes out. Up next, we have a very, very interesting node. So what this is going to do is you are going to pick the middle node, and then you're going to pick a sub node as the actual ascendancy point itself. And what this is going to do is going to give you one of 3 new curses. You're either going to be able to get Pacify, Penance Mark, or Affliction. What Pacify is going to do is absolutely nothing. But once a certain portion of the curse has run out, it is then going to make you immune to all damage from whatever is cursed with it. So one example here might be for the first 75% duration of the curse itself, it does nothing. And then for the last 25% duration, you are completely immune to, for example, Shaper's attacks. This is going to be interesting because it's going to make you either think, do I want to scale my curse duration so I have a much longer downtime where it's not doing anything, but then have a really big portion where I'm just completely immune to damage? Or do I want to scale my curse duration downwards so my curse overall is shorter, but I have a smaller window before I am immune to all damage? Penance Mark is going to be very interesting, and it's going to allow some new builds to be able to do bosses when they really didn't have the ability to do it as easily before. What Penance Mark is going to do is every time you attack the target that has Penance Mark on it, you're going to summon extra minions that are going to attack you. This means you can summon extra enemies for attacking an enemy. These enemies aren't going to actually give you anything, but they're going to give you flash charges. They're going to give you on kill effects, on hit effects. This is a way for you to interact with a boss with builds that don't traditionally have a good way of dealing with a single target when there's no other enemies nearby. The example here would be Arcali. This would give you consistent enemies to attack to spawn more Arcali spiders, meaning you won't actually need to run a worm flask anymore if you just take Choir the Damned. Lastly, we have Black Mass. This is going to be a curse that you actually use on your minions. This cannot affect enemies. It can only affect minions that are damageable. And what this does is it makes it so they die faster, which means that this has some really interesting synergy with minion stability. Lastly, we have the final node of Warlock, which is Foul Pact. This Primalist is going to be the node that's behind the 3 curses, and it's just going to make each of the curses stronger. Enemies that are pacified by you are going to take 20% more damage. Minions that have the affliction on them are going to have onslaught, and the phantasms that you summon from Penance Bark are going to give you more flash charges and have a chance to give you a Vassal on death. Overall, like I said, I feel like this is just going to be a niche ascendancy that's only going to be used on some builds, and I feel like we might potentially see some new meta defining builds with Cannibalized Faith on the left side of it. Lastly, we have the most interesting of the 3 ascendancies. We have the Primalist. The Primalist is very simple in how it works. The main draw here is going to be the 3 charm sockets on the left. There are 2 other nodes on here as well, but these don't really do anything too interesting. The first one being Howl the Wolf. This makes it so your war cries give you extra loot from corpses. So it's just war cry magic find. If you've played D2, this is a build from D2 coming back. It's quite interesting. It's really cute. And this is effectively a now magic find ascendancy. It'll be interesting to see just how good this is and if this is going to be incorporated into magic find or not. The other node on here is going to be Might of the Bear, which you are required to take before you get to 3 charm sockets. It's going to increase your character size by 5%. And it's going to give you an extra little bit of inventory. We now have more inventory space in Path of Exile, where you get a little extra inventory button that you can click on to open a tiny little window that's going to store 20 things. This is enough to store a 6 socket items, so a chest plate and a few little bits of bubble currency. It's very cute, and honestly, I really wouldn't expect anything more from the Primalist considering how powerful these charm sockets are going to be. So what are the sockets themselves? Well, they don't do anything on their own, but the power here is the ability for you to socket in charms. Now, the charms are just a mishmash of different ascendancies put together. So for example, here on this charm, you can see the top roll is just Profane Bloom from an occultist, and the bottom roll is the Consecrated Ground Lingers from Pious Path of an Inquisitor. These are going to be able to roll any 2 ascendancy points together, and this basically turns Primalist into build your own ascendancy. So let's say you're playing a Juggernaut and you're playing a build that doesn't really have good clear because you don't have a way to get explosions in your build. Well, you can go Primalist, and what you could do is you could just pick up 3 different charms that have Profane Bloom on them. Now, Profane Bloom here only has a 14% chance to explode. So I'm going to assume it has a roll. I'm going to assume it's probably 10 to 20%. But let's say you picked up 3 max rolled versions of these, as there's nothing that says that these cannot stack. That means you suddenly have 60% chance to explode Profane Bloom in your Juggernaut build. These can be incredibly powerful, and they can potentially give you some really interesting effects. One that they showcased on the live stream, which they don't have here, is the Pathfinder flash charges gained per second. This means that effectively every class can be Pathfinder. And if you're playing a Pathfinder, your Pathfinder can now be more Pathfinder because there's nothing stopping you from putting charms in here from your current ascendancy. So if I'm playing occultist, I can put in 3 more Profane Bloom charms to now have 80% chance to explode Profane Bloom. The power of this is incredible, and you effectively can think of Primalist as what are 6 ascendancy points that you love from other classes that you wish you can have in your build. Do you want Tailwind from a Deadeye? Do you want explosions from an occultist? Do you want the double armor and the mini transcendence from a Juggernaut? Do you want the Consecrated Ground Lingers? Whatever you want, you can fit into your build, and Primalist is just going to be hilariously broken. It's going to allow for some hilariously interesting build, and I'm so looking forward to it. I feel like this is going to be a ascendancy choice that most people are going to be interested in. I feel like this is going to be the one that most people pick. I feel like the second most picked one is going to be the Warden, as it has really nice defensive buffs through the Barkskin skill, and it has potentially really powerful effects through the tinctures that we have. And I feel like the third most picked class is going to be Warlock. It doesn't matter what you pick, because no matter what, these are not permanent choice. You can change them whenever you want by simply going to the Wildwood and interacting with it further. This is going to be something that you can pick and choose as much as you want. And for example, let's say you do pick a Primalist and you don't really like it, you feel like your build would do better with a Warden, you can go ahead and respec this, just like how you can respec your ascendancy for your current class. Overall, this is going to give us so many more tools to play with this season, and I'm so excited the way they've done this. I'm so glad that these don't replace your current ascendancy, and I'm glad that they're just giving these to everyone as a pick and choose whatever you want option. I'm really happy these are not class locked, because this just allows us to have the free flowing build potential that we love in Path of Exile. And I'm so looking forward to the builds that people come up with this. And I'm really looking forward to using these ascendancies to make my current builds more powerful as well. That's all I really have for these ascendancies. I feel like this is an absolute win for Path of Exile. I feel like this is one of the coolest things that they can possibly do as a new season reward. And I feel like we're just going to have so much fun with this new way of thinking about builds. I can't wait for the season to start. I can't wait to play around with him. That's all I really have for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you kitties in the next one.